Welcome to the discussion. I'm your host, James Nash, and today's topic we'll be talking about: is there an increase in selectivity in American colleges, or is there a disconnect in what the college is looking for in a student and what a student believes that the college is looking for? Today we'll be looking at a host of different evidence. First, we'll be talking with Colleen Sweeney, a junior at Trinity College, about her experience when applying to college and the college admissions process. We'll also be looking at a couple of other students from Trinity College and what they felt during their application process. We will also be looking at the research done by Dr. Rachel Rubin in her paper published in 2014, Who Gets In and Why? An Examination of Admissions to America's Most Selective Colleges and Universities. As well, we'll be tackling the question, are American colleges becoming more selective? And helping us with that will be Caroline M. Huxby's paper, written in the fall of 2009, published in the Journal of Economic Perspectives, and that's called The Changing Selectivity of American Colleges. That's what we have today on The Discussion. And now let's bring in Colleen Sweeney so we can talk about her application process. Colleen is a junior at Trinity College and a neuroscience major from California. Hi, Colleen.
Hi.
So the topic is college admissions and the process. When you applied to colleges, what did you feel was the most important part of your application?
Probably my essays, just because I know that my strongest skill on paper is more writing rather than test taking. So although I felt that my scores from ACT and SAT were important, I knew that the real thing that would make me stand out from other applicants was going to be my writing skills in the essays.
What did you think about in terms of GPA in high school? Was that an important part, or was it mostly your essays?
Well, I always had a fairly high GPA. Just like based off of my high school, it wasn't the most rigorous or competitive really, so getting 4.3 was not actually hard for me at all in high school, so it wasn't really that as an issue for me as much. It was more of just my SAT and ACT scores were probably middle of the pack, a little bit above average, but I thought that my essays were my stronger part.
So one of the important things that we're talking about today is that colleges seem to be more selective than they used to be. Now, later on, we'll talk about how that actually seems to not be the truth. But while you were applying to college, did you hear that it is harder than it used to be to get into college?
I definitely would say that it seemed like a more competitive process now. My dad, when he was applying to college, didn't get in anywhere because of his grades, and then went to UC San Diego's admissions office and talked to the person to convince them to let him go to that school, which he ended up being able to.
Did you feel that you knew what a college was looking for, or were you just trying your best?
Well, I have an interesting situation in that most of my family works in academia and works at colleges, so they have told me things that admissions office people would say they were looking for from students. But even still, I didn't have a for sure idea. They can tell you to have really good grades and do extracurriculars and community service, but at the end of the day, you really don't know what it is about you that makes you stand out and makes them accept you into their school.
So it's somewhat of a blind process.
I would say so. You can be prepared for it in as many ways as possible just by being a good student and a good person, but at the end of the day, you don't know if the fact that you're you is going to be a good thing or a bad thing.
All right. Well, thank you very much for talking with us, and hope to have you back sometime later.
Great. Thanks for having me.
Now, after talking with Colleen, we talked with two other students, Jack Lynch and Molly Moriarty. Both of them had very different views on their college admissions process. Both of them felt that the ACT and SAT scores were by far the most important parts of their application, and worked vigorously in order to raise it to the standards at which the schools that they were applying were looking for. I really felt that my ACT scores were the most important. We started working on ACT test taking and strategies as early as the beginning of my junior year. My brother, who is currently going through the application process as well, says that he and his friends are really only worried about raising their ACT scores. Interviews and essays seem to be something that has fallen to the wayside, which begs the question, what is the most important part of an application? Is it your ACT? Is it your essay? Is it an interview? For that, we'll have to look at Rachel Rubin's article, and that will be coming up after the break. Welcome back to the discussion. I'm James Nash, and again, today the topic is college admissions process. Is it more selective than it used to be, or is there a disconnect between what colleges want and what students think colleges want? We're about to start looking at Rachel Rubin's research essay about the top selective colleges in the country. She got a chance to sit down and talk with the admissions officers to really truly see how they think. The first part of her research took into account many different types of colleges. She used 33 private research universities, 27 private liberal arts colleges, and 3 public research universities. Now, when talking with the different college admissions, they found that the first step in most of these colleges' admissions is dividing the applicants into different applicant pools. These pools divide by academic merit, whether or not they are a minority, whether or not they have alumni who went to the school, the ability to pay full tuition, or whether they need financial aid, and then students who are athletes or have some exceptional talent that would better the school. Now, the results of the study found that 57% of those same schools said that the rigor of the high school transcript was the most important part in determining whether or not the applicant was academically to the standards of the school. More interestingly, though, they found that only 4% of the schools thought that standardized testing scores were the most important part, which is interesting considering most people that I've talked with seem to believe that ACT and SAT scores are the end-all be-all when it comes to applying to college. The last question on the survey asked whether or not the schools would like to take part in an interview process. 18 out of the 63 colleges who took part in the original survey decided that they would indeed go on to the interview portion. Now, we don't know the names of which of these colleges and institutions they are, but you do get an interesting look into the admissions officer's mind. For example, one admission officer said, "A large portion of time is spent trying to understand what an applicant has achieved relative to the opportunities he or she was afforded. Identifying whether students took the most challenging courses that were available to that helps us understand this. We don't want to penalize students who were not afforded opportunities, but we want to make sure and ensure that our applicants took advantage of the opportunities they were offered." In this case, it makes complete sense that GPA would be one of the more important factors when it comes to college admissions. It's interesting to hear that because very few of the people that we talked with cared about their GPA or their high school transcript. They didn't see it as an important aspect of their application. But in this case, this admissions officer seems to say, no, the high school application, the transcript that they get is the most important part. And it makes sense. Seeing whether or not a student has put in as much effort as they possibly could, given the opportunities that they had, tells you whether or not they're willing to work hard at college. In some way or another, this is a way that an applicant can signal to the college that they have worked hard and are ready to go to their institution. Now, there was one other main aspect of the study that I found to be incredibly interesting, and that is that actually the student's ability to pay for college comes into play more so than I would have thought. Schools that have to meet financial aid, or schools that don't have a big enough endowment to have a lot of financial aid students, need to take into account whether or not a student can pay. One of the admissions officers interviewed said the last thing that they look at is money, whether a student has the money to pay, because we're a tuition-driven institution. This probably applies to 10 to 15% of the applicants, although this question remains till the end. It can determine a student's acceptance. Now, it's interesting because college is a business, and when applying, people might not take into account that their lack of being able to pay for college could actually be a reason for not getting into the school at all. This asks the question, are more applicants getting turned away because they can't afford college? And they might have the academic, extracurricular things that this college needs, but in the end, money becomes the deciding factor of whether or not they get into schools. There's a very real chance that that is one of the reasons why colleges seem like they're more selective. And actually, Rubin says in her article that several of the deans explain that there are times where they have to reject a higher academically ranked student because they can't pay. And so therefore, it seems as if it's a harder school to get in, but in the end, it's just a game of numbers. The next thing we're going to talk about is Caroline M. Huxby's paper written in the fall of 2009, published in the Journal of Economic Perspectives, called The Changing Selectivity of American Colleges. I think this will be really a deciding factor of whether or not American colleges are actually being more selective. She has some very interesting facts that say otherwise. One thing that Rubin did find in her research is that the increase in high school graduates since 1955 has gone up 131%, which makes sense as more people are able to go to high school and more jobs require a high school diploma. But what makes it strange is that the increase in the number of seats available to freshmen has actually gone up 297%. That means that there are significantly more seats open to freshmen than there are of high school graduates. So what is it that makes it seem like these colleges are being more selective than they used to be when the numbers show that there are actually ample spots for the amount of people prepared to go to college? Huxby believes that this has happened due to something that she calls resorting. Students have been able to go and look at more selective colleges that are farther away from them. This is because the cost in order to travel or to get information about a college is a lot cheaper. Because of this, highly qualified students from different areas can try and get into colleges that aren't just around the corner. Someone from California can go to Harvard. In the past, that wasn't an option. This is definitely a reason why it seems like it is a more selective process. But in the end, the numbers really still show differently. For example, Huxby brings up that in 1965, there were 0.47 freshman seats available in the most selective colleges for each student with a verbal SAT score of 700. That's pre-1995 scaling. And then in 2007, there's actually 0.58 freshman seats for the same student. She believes that although the most selective colleges have not gotten significantly larger, they have gotten big enough that they've overshot the amount of students actually scoring in that very top range, thus leaving them with seats that they can't fill. To wrap up the podcast, I'll ask again the question, are American colleges becoming more selective? According to Huxby, no, they're not. But why is it that it seems as if they are? I think that a mix of a miscommunication between what colleges are looking for in an applicant and what a student presents is partially part of the problem. There's another aspect that is interesting, which is that a college is a business just like any other. They need to take into account all different parts. One applicant might be great because they can score a 35 on their ACT, but another applicant might be great because they play the piano like Beethoven. In this case, those applicants could be seen as even in the school's eyes, but not in the eyes of a student who is looking and trying to figure out what schools that they should apply to. I, for one, can say thing for sure. I'm glad that I'm done with the college application process. Now, I might be applying to some sort of graduate school or something, but I'm hoping that the process is a little bit different. That's all for me. Thanks for listening to The Discussion with James Nash. See you next time.